Doombreed, also known as the Skull Lord, is a demon prince of Khorne. He was one of the first demon princes, created by the blood god in his infancy, taking the form of a giant bloodthirster wreathed in thick acrid smoke. Doombreed has plagued mankind countless times over the millennia, waging war with the Imperium from the days of the Horus Heresy up until the 13th Black Crusade. He was present on board Horus's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, during the Battle of Terra in the dying days of the Horus Heresy, witnessing the death of the Blood Angel's Primarch Sanguinius, and even fighting against the Emperor himself alongside the Slaneshi demon prince Macari. His true name has long been forgotten, but he was once a mighty warlord who committed acts of violence, genocide, and murder on such a scale that in doing so he gained the attention of the young Khorne, who was so pleased with the carnage that he granted the warlord the ultimate reward of demonhood. So who could have possibly become Doombreed? We know he was a warlord who was said to have ravished entire nations, and history is filled with many notorious and infamous warriors and generals, such as Hannibal of the Carthaginians, who famously marched his army over the Alps to assault Rome and Greece, or King Alaric of the Visigoths, whose raids aided to the downfall of the Western Roman Empire. We know that the warlord committed his acts of violence between M1 and M2, which by the Gregorian calendar would be any time between the years 0 and 2000 AD, so warlords who were active BC would be ineligible for candidacy. One possible candidate is a man who was not only a savage warrior and brutal murderer, but was also active during the time frame Khorne supposedly awoke to full consciousness, and like Khorne himself, had a taste for blood. Count Vlad Tepish, or as he is known more infamously, Vlad the Impaler. Living within the 1400s, Vlad Tepish was known for his wars against the Ottoman Empire, he and the Wallachian army preventing their expansion through his sheer brutality, and leading from the front lines as a warrior, and operated a scorched earth policy, essentially destroying and butchering anyone and anything they came across to prevent it falling into enemy hands. At one point, Vlad and several of his men disguised themselves as Ottoman soldiers and attempted to murder the Ottoman Sultan. The attempt failed, however they did succeed in creating mass confusion amongst the Ottoman soldiers, causing them to slaughter one another in the belief that their comrades were really the enemy. He was most infamous, however, for impaling victims on vast wooden spikes, executing them in one of the most brutal and agonizing ways possible, and it is said that the road to Wallachia was lined with hundreds of impaled corpses. It was even suggested that Vlad liked to dine amongst his impaled victims, dipping his bread in their blood. So not only does the time frame potentially match up being within the Middle Ages, but Vlad also meets the requirement of being a skilled brutal warrior, pitiless killer, and not to mention the rumoured taste for human blood. His final resting place is unknown, and when the location his body was rumoured to lay was on Earth, there was naught but the bones of animals. Could it be possible that the reason his body wasn't there was because he had ascended into demonhood and faded into the warp after pleasing the young blood god? There is a potential problem with Vlad Tepish becoming Doombreed, however, and that comes from, surprisingly, the birth of one of the other Chaos gods. Prior to the birth of Slanesh, as she dreamed in the warp, while being fueled by the acts of unrestrained hedonism of the Eldar race, her influence caused the Eldar to slaughter one another, feast upon the corpses of the dead, and burn entire worlds in acts of debauchery, before the warp literally spilled out of their highly psychic minds, heralding the birth of Slanesh, tearing a hole in the fabric of reality, now known as the Eye of Terror. In 1331, the greatest pandemic in human history occurred, the Black Death. The Black Death is suspected to have started in China, and over the course of the next decade or so, spread throughout Asia, India, the Middle East, and Europe, claiming the lives of anything between 20 to 80% of the population of each country it passed through. Because of how massive in scale this plague was, it's a possibility that this pandemic was, in effect, an aftershock caused by Nurgle reaching full consciousness and awakening. Despite what many believe, Khorne, not Nurgle, was the first Chaos God to awaken fully, and given how prevalent war was within the Middle Ages across the world, with some of the most notable being the Crusades, which began in the early 10th century, it would be assumed that Khorne's pending birth fueled these feelings of war within humanity, and as such was heralded by them. As stated within Realm of Chaos Lost in the Damned, quote, Khorne was the first of the great powers to awake fully, and an era of wars and conflict raged across the globe, which further strengthens the link between the coming of Khorne and the wars of the Crusades within the Middle Ages. This fact would also leave the brutal warlords Attila the Hun, who was another popular potential candidate, ineligible to becoming Doombreed, as Attila's reign of terror took place between 434 and 453 AD, prior to the Crusades. Since Doombreed was the first demon prince Khorne created, if he was created before the birth of Nurgle, which seemingly occurred within the 1300s, then Doombreed could not have been Vlad the Impaler, for he was active within the 1400s, although admittedly this is assuming Khorne chose his first demon prince prior to Nurgle's birth. This would also debunk the possibility of the warlord Tamerlane from becoming Doombreed as well, as he reigned from 1370 to 1405, after the birth of Nurgle, again if we assume Doombreed became a demon prince prior to Nurgle's birth. Another more likely candidate for Doombreed is that of the warlord Temujin, or as he is more famously known, Genghis Khan. Temujin came to power by uniting many of the nomadic tribes of Northeast Asia within the early 1200s. After founding the Mongol Empire, he launched a series of wars that conquered most of Eurasia. These campaigns were often accompanied by wholesale massacres of civilian populations, especially in the lands controlled by the neighbouring Kwarmazian and Western Jia dynasties. By the end of his life, his empire had spread over a significant portion of Central Asia and China. The exact cause of his death remains a mystery, but is variously attributed to being killed in action, disease, falling from his horse, dying from his wounds, and even old age. Since the circumstances of his death cannot be confirmed, did he in fact die, or did he ascend to demonhood? His time frame certainly fits the criteria, being active between 1206 and 1227, places his reign between the beginning of the Crusades, caused by the birthing of Khorne, and before the outbreak of the bubonic plague, heralding the birth of Nurgle. And his actions in the brutal slaughter of civilians and soldiers alike would be pleasing to the young blood god, especially as his path of conquest covered several other nations. Who do you think could have been Doombreed? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.